Lieutenant Andrea Hale's hands hovered over the controls of her sleek scout fighter Novahawk, the quiet hum of its systems her only companion in the vast emptiness of high Earth orbit. Outside the narrow cockpit, the sprawling asteroid mining complex known as Perseus Station loomed in the distance, a skeletal ghost. The fighter's navigation HUD pinged faintly, marking the outer boundary of the cluster. Beyond lay an intricate web of interconnected asteroids, their surfaces scarred and hollowed by decades of mining. In their heyday, these asteroids had pulsed with activity. Now, they were cold, dead monuments to a waning frontier, their usefulness devoured and their purpose forgotten. Andrea shifted her gaze to the viewport as she eased the fighter closer. The first asteroid came into view, a massive rock suspended in the void, its surface pockmarked with mining rigs and blast craters. Thick steel cables stretched between it and the others, tethering them in a delicate lattice that swayed faintly in the microgravity. Some of the cables had snapped, their frayed ends drifting lazily in space like ghostly tendrils. As Novahawk glided through the outer reaches of Perseus Station, Hale scanned her surroundings. The once vibrant network of asteroids was now a crumbling, fragmented shell. Mining platforms hung crookedly off the rocks. Some collapsed entirely. Rotating transit rings meant to ferry workers and supplies spun aimlessly, no longer bound by human hands. Her sensors crackled faintly as she passed a cluster of debris, remnants of a solar-powered drone system. The station's original inhabitants had relied on an intricate network of automated machinery to handle resource extraction, but now, those machines hung lifeless, their circuitry fried by time and neglect. Hale toggled her comm system, opening a channel to her carrier fleet far beyond the edge of the cluster. Novahawk to Solace Command, entering Perseus Station perimeter. No immediate signs of activity. Beginning standard reconnaissance sweep. Her voice was calm, clipped, professional, an anchor in the unrelenting void. "Copy that, Hawk. Keep us posted," came the reply, crackling with interference. The distance between her and the fleet was vast, and the link would only grow weaker as she pushed deeper into the station's heart. She tapped a few keys, initiating the fighter's deep scan array. A faint hum vibrated through the hull as the ship's sensors began mapping the asteroid network. The data scrolled across her HUD, revealing the station's infrastructure. Narrow maintenance corridors threading between asteroids, long-defunct habitat modules, and storage bays with their airlocks left yawning open to space. Hale's thoughts drifted as the scan ran its course. She'd read the briefing on Perseus Station. Once the jewel of humanity's high-orbit mining operations, a critical node in the supply chain to Earth and the colonies. But as with so many projects, it had fallen victim to the unraveling. First came the failure of the Spire, Earth's orbital elevator, severing humanity's most efficient link between the surface and space. Then the wars tore apart Mars and its colonies. With no one left to maintain the outer installations, Perseus Station and its kin had been abandoned, the dream of a thriving space infrastructure left to rot. For Hale, it was more than a history lesson. It was personal. Her family had been among those who fled the chaos of Earth for an O'Neill cylinder. Life in space had been hard, isolated, and fragile. But it was the only life she knew, and now it felt as if the edges of that fragile existence were being picked apart, thread by thread. Her HUD pinged softly, jolting her from her reverie. Hale frowned as she reviewed the data feed. Faint power fluctuations. At first she thought it might be residual energy from the station's long-abandoned systems. But the patterns were irregular, pulsing in a way that suggested intent. A very complex pattern. "Odd," she murmured, leaning closer to the display. Novahawk's AI chirped in response, highlighting the source of the readings deep within the asteroid cluster. It was subtle, just a whisper of energy, like a heartbeat buried beneath layers of rock and steel. It shouldn't have been possible. Perseus Station had been abandoned for decades. The fighter drifted closer, its engines whispering against the void. Outside the station seemed to darken, the light of distant stars swallowed by the looming asteroid shapes. Hale's gaze flicked to the solar panels again. A few of them were tilted, their surfaces charred and warped. At first she thought it might be damage from a micrometeorite storm, but the scorch marks radiated outward, as if something had burned through from within. Her pulse quickened. The power readings continued, steady now, leading her deeper into the station's labyrinth. This wasn't random. Someone, or something, had been here. The comm line crackled again, but this time it wasn't command. The static hissed and warbled, faint tones weaving through the interference like distorted whispers. Hale's throat tightened and she instinctively toggled the channel off. Her mind raced. The systemic failures that had plagued the mining operations, the fraying edges of humanity's reach into space, weren't just mechanical entropy or human negligence. There was something else. "Novahawk to Solace Command," she said, her voice firm but edged with tension, picking up anomalous energy signatures inside the cluster, requesting immediate analysis and advisement. No response. The comm link hissed, distorted and faint, before cutting to silence. Hale's grip tightened on the controls. As the fighter approached the heart of the cluster, a shadow began to emerge in the distance, massive and angular, a shape that didn't belong among the mining equipment. Hale squinted, her hands moving instinctively to the weapon's controls. In her gut, she knew she was about to confirm humanity's worst fears. Hale tightened her grip on the Novahawk's controls as the mining complex thinned out, the asteroids giving way to open void. Then she saw it. She couldn't help but hold her breath. It loomed ahead, a kilometer-long alien construct fused into the surface of a massive asteroid. It was like nothing she had seen before. The structure's surface was jagged and black, its angular design alien and insectoid in nature. Spindly limbs jutted from its sides like an insect's exoskeleton, each limb lined with sharp, spiked protrusions. The entire thing pulsed with an unnatural menace, as if the asteroid had been consumed and repurposed by some nightmarish intelligence. At one end of the structure, a glowing sphere of blue-green energy pulsed rhythmically, embedded like an organ in a twisted body. The light shimmered across the surface of the dock, casting eerie reflections on the asteroid's cold, rocky surface. Hale's sensors registered the energy signature as off the charts, her systems struggling to analyze the output. "Novahawk to Solace Command," Hale said, her voice clipped and deliberate. "I found something. It's not human." No response, only static. The calm silence was expected this deep into the cluster, but it didn't help her unease. This was wrong. The structure's design screamed predatory intent. It wasn't a derelict. It wasn't abandoned. It was alive. Hale deployed a trio of small sensor drones, her fingers working the controls with precision. The drones darted out, their metallic hulls glinting faintly as they zipped toward the alien structure. Each drone began its sweep, circling the dock in calculated orbits, scanning its jagged exterior for data. The readings were strange. Hale's HUD flickered as the scans returned information. Massive energy output, intricate internal structures, organic traces interwoven with the machinery. Hale frowned, adjusting the sensors. The drones were picking up faint signals from within the dock, signals that resembled a language or code. It wasn't anything she could decipher, but the rhythmic, almost melodic patterns unsettled her. It was as if the dock itself were singing to the void. Then, movement. The alien dock stirred. Spindly appendages along its surface unfurled like a flower blooming, revealing rows of angular shapes nestled within. The shapes moved, detaching from the dock and drifting into the void. Her heart sank as she realized what they were. Dozens of pyramid-shaped ships began to fan out, their lattice-like frameworks glinting faintly in the blue-green light of the energy sphere. Each one was a dark, alien creation, their sharp edges radiating hostility. Hale's jaw clenched as she spotted the grotesque addition at their fronts. Each ship was capped with a whistler-like head, its insectoid features molded into the alien vessels. The ships were spider-like in movement, their articulated legs adjusting mid-flight as they repositioned. They moved with precision, as if responding to some unseen signal. Her sensors blared a warning. The ships were scanning her back. Hale didn't waste time. Her fingers flew across the console as she initiated a priority alert to Solace Command. Nova Hawk to Solace Command, urgent report. Alien structure discovered in Perseus Station, approximate length 1 kilometer. Dozens of unknown fighters launching from the dock, transmitting visuals and data now. The console flickered. The data feed stuttered. No, come on. She glanced up, her breath catching in her throat. The alien fighters had noticed her. The lead vessel tilted slightly, its whistler-like head angling toward her. A faint glow built up along its frame, a sickly green hue that Hale instantly recognized as a weapon charge. Hale slammed her throttle forward, the Nova Hawk roaring to life as it banked hard to starboard. The first blast grazed the scout fighter's wing, a searing beam of green energy that sent sparks flying. She gritted her teeth as alarms screamed, her armor absorbing most of the blow. The alien fighters were fast, faster than anything she'd encountered before. They swarmed with terrifying efficiency, their angular forms darting through the asteroid field like predators closing in on prey. Hale fired her engines, weaving through the debris field to buy herself time. Behind her, the alien ships followed, their articulated legs shifting as they adjusted their trajectories mid-pursuit. Nova Hawk to Solace Command, I've been engaged. Repeat, I've been engaged by hostile forces. Static. Another blast streaked past her viewport, narrowly missing the cockpit. The alien weapons weren't just energy beams, they were accompanied by projectiles, small, squid-like drones launched in pursuit. Hale's HUD lit up with warnings as the drones latched onto debris, using the metal to slingshot closer. She banked hard, releasing a burst of chaff to confuse the incoming swarm. The drones scattered briefly, but they adjusted within seconds. Hale's hands moved instinctively, arming her missiles. If that's how you want to play. She fired, twin streaks of light arcing through the void. The missiles found their mark, slamming into one of the alien ships and detonating in a brilliant explosion. The lattice-like structure collapsed inward, the Whistler head disintegrating in the blast. The other fighters hesitated, as if recalculating. That's right, Hale muttered, her voice tight. I bite back. But even as she tried to steady herself, she couldn't shake the feeling growing in her gut. This wasn't a fight she could win. The Whistler-made dock was waking up, its energy sphere pulsing brighter with each passing moment. And there were more of them, more fighters, more drones, more danger than she could handle. Nova Hawk to Solace Command, she said, desperation creeping into her tone. The situation is worse than we thought. Way worse. She launched another missile, spinning the fighter into a tight barrel roll to avoid the retaliatory fire. Behind her, the alien fighters regrouped, their spider-like forms glinting with malevolent purpose as they continued their pursuit. Hale pushed the Nova Hawk to its limits, engines screaming as she dove deeper into the asteroid field. If she was going to survive, she needed more than skill. She needed a miracle. Hale's heart pounded in her chest as the Nova Hawk shuddered from the force of a near miss. Beams of sickly green energy lanced through space, slicing the darkness, leaving her no time to think, only react. The alien fighters were on her every moment. Let's see what you're made of, Hale muttered, her voice steady despite the chaos. Hale dove hard, banking sharply to avoid a salvo of coordinated fire that passed inches from her fuselage. The Nova Hawk's engine screamed as she darted between jagged fragments of mining infrastructure. Massive steel cables and broken solar arrays drifted like forgotten relics, offering momentary cover as energy beams scorched the debris around her. Hale flipped a switch and the Nova Hawk's twin machine cannons roared to life, The heavy rounds streaked through the void, catching one of the alien fighters mid-turn. The lattice-like frame crumpled under the assault, and the ship exploded in a flash of blue-green light. "Gotcha," Hale hissed. Her brief triumph was cut short as the wreckage of the destroyed alien ship released several squid-like drones. The small, articulated creatures latched onto her fighter's hull, their metallic limbs clawing at the Nova Hawk's armor. Hale yanked the stick to throw the fighter into a violent spin. The Nova Hawk's engines howled as she dragged the ship dangerously close to a jagged fragment of mining scaffolding. Sparks erupted as the drones scraped against the structure, two of them shearing off entirely. The remaining drones clung stubbornly, their legs slicing deeper into the fighter's plating. Hale deployed a pulse of electromagnetic chaff, frying the remaining drones and sending them spiraling into the void. The battle escalated. More alien fighters swarmed into the fray. The Nova Hawk was already at its limits, weaving through the chaotic debris field with razor-sharp precision. A massive asteroid loomed ahead, its surface scarred by mining operations. Hale threaded her fighter through the narrow gaps in the mining infrastructure, using the drifting cables and machinery as cover. The alien ships pursued relentlessly, their lattice frames twisting unnaturally to fit through tight spaces. Energy beams cut through the void, illuminating the wreckage with ghostly green light. Hale's HUD lit up with proximity warnings as she deployed a cluster of autonomous combat drones. The small machines flitted out in all directions, drawing the alien fighters' attention. Two of the drones baited a group of pursuers into a cluster of machinery. Hale seized the opportunity, unleashing a barrage of machine cannon fire. The alien ships disintegrated in the resulting explosion, the shockwave rattling her cockpit. "Still breathing," she muttered, her hands steady on the controls, despite the sweat dripping down her forehead. Hale's sensors suddenly blared a new alert. The glowing sphere on the alien dock pulsed brighter, its light bathing the asteroid field in an eerie green-blue hue. Her scanners detected a massive energy buildup within the sphere, its readings spiking dangerously. "What is that thing?" she whispered. Before she could ponder further, a low-frequency signal emanated from the dock, a mechanical drone that seemed to echo across the void. Her sensors pinged new contacts. More alien fighters emerging from the shadowed recesses of the asteroid field. "Great," Hale muttered, punching the throttle. "Just what I needed." She set a course for the carrier, but the alien ships shifted, cutting off her escape route. They moved like a hive, anticipating her every move. She set a course for the carrier, but the alien ships shifted, cutting off her escape route. They moved like a school of fish, anticipating her every move. Hale's mind raced. Her ammunition was running low, and the Nova Hawk's armor wasn't designed to take a beating. She had to outthink them. Switching tactics, she deployed her remaining drones. This time she programmed them to mimic the Nova Hawk's signal, creating decoys that split off in different directions. Several alien ships peeled away to chase the false targets, buying her precious seconds. "Time to get reckless," she muttered, pushing the Nova Hawk into a dive that brought her perilously close to the alien dock. The spindly arms of the structure reached out like skeletal fingers, their jagged edges bristling with menace. Hale weaved through the dock's limbs, using its chaotic geometry to disrupt her pursuers. One alien fighter clipped an arm, the collision sending it spiraling into another ship. With a precise burst of her machine cannons, Hale targeted a critical joint in the dock's structure. The arm collapsed, smashing into two more alien fighters and sending debris cascading through the void. The remaining alien fighters regrouped, their whistler heads glowing brighter as they closed in for the kill. Hale's engines grumbled as she zigzagged through the debris field with desperate speed. Proximity alerts flared again. Another swarm of squid-like drones had launched from the dock, closing in fast. Hale gritted her teeth, launching a missile into a cluster of alien ships behind her. The explosion was blinding, scattering the drones and momentarily halting the pursuers. Hale didn't wait to see the outcome. She burned her engines at maximum thrust, the Nova Hawk streaking away from the chaos. Her cockpit was filled with the sound of alarms and the faint hum of damaged systems. She glanced back at the debris field, now glowing faintly with the light of the alien dock. "I hope they're listening," she muttered, her voice hoarse. "Because they have no idea what's coming." The Nova Hawk hurtled toward the carrier as fast as she dared. The Nova Hawk docked with the Eclipse Dawn, its battered frame barely holding together after the harrowing escape. Hale staggered out of the cockpit, her body aching from the fight's relentless strain. The carrier's hangar was dimly lit, its usual order and calm disrupted by the urgency of her arrival. Engineers swarmed her ship, their voices tense as they assessed the damage. "Respirai." "Hail Howl," a voice cut through the din. Commander Reyes stood at the edge of the hangar, his dark uniform as crisp as always. His sharp eyes betrayed a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Briefing room." "Now." Minutes later, Hale sat at the head of a conference table, her flight suit still marked with soot and sweat. The room was small, its walls lined with holographic displays flickering to life as she uploaded her data. Reyes and his senior officers leaned in, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of the alien dock's image. The footage was unsettling. The kilometer-long spiked structure rotated slowly, its glowing sphere pulsing like a malignant heart. Alien fighters swarmed around it, their movements coordinated and unnatural. The room was silent as the data played out, punctuated only by the occasional hiss of air vents. "This isn't just an anomaly," Reyes finally said, his voice low and steady. "It's a beachhead." Hale nodded, her throat dry. "The Whistlers aren't scavengers anymore. They've built something. And it's massive." Reyes turned to his officers. "We're looking at the next stage of this war. We need to get this to high command." Before they could continue, a klaxon blared through the ship. The room's lights dimmed, replaced by a red emergency glow. The voice of the tactical officer came through the intercom. "Commander, sensors are picking up multiple contacts emerging from the asteroid field. It's a swarm, sir." The Eclipse Dawn's bridge buzzed with activity as Reyes and Hale entered. Holographic displays lit up with the movement of hundreds of alien contacts pouring out from the asteroid mining complex. The glowing sphere on the dock pulsed faster now, its light cascading across the void like a harbinger of doom. Hale froze, her eyes locked on the screen. "It's calling them." The swarm emerged like a tide, black, lattice-like ships with glowing whistler heads moving with eerie synchronicity, like a school of fish. They surrounded the human fleet like a predator encircling its prey. "Red alert," Reyes barked. "All hands to battle stations, prepare to engage." The carrier's guns roared to life as the swarm closed in. Railgun rounds streaked across the void, tearing into the first wave of alien fighters. Explosions lit up the darkness, but the Whistler ships pressed forward, their energy weapons slicing through space. The Eclipse Dawn rocked violently as an energy beam struck its port side. Sparks erupted from control panels and the acrid smell of burnt circuitry filled the air. The tactical officer shouted, "They're overwhelming our defenses." Hale's stomach churned as she watched the swarm maneuver. Each destruction of one fighter only seemed to summon more, like cutting through an unending tide. The human fleet fought valiantly, but it was clear they were outmatched. The larger ships, burdened with slower weapons, became easy targets. A nearby destroyer erupted into a fireball, its fragments scattering into the void. Reyes gripped the edge of the command console, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Signal the fleet. Begin evacuation procedures. We're pulling out." Hale's hands clenched into fists. "We're running?" "We're surviving, Lieutenant," Reyes snapped. "If we stay, we're all dead." As the order was relayed, the human ships began to fall back. The Eclipse Dawn's engines roared, propelling it away from the battlefield. Smaller escort ships formed a protective screen, their guns buying precious seconds for the carrier to escape. But the Whistlers gave chase. Their ships moved with terrifying speed. their energy weapons carving through human vessels like paper. Hale watched in horror as a frigate was torn apart, its crew's final moments marked by a silent, fiery explosion. In a desperate maneuver, the Eclipse Dawn deployed flares and decoys, scattering the swarm's formation. For a brief moment, the carrier slipped into the shadows of a drifting asteroid, its engines burning hard to put distance between itself and the pursuing swarm. The Eclipse Dawn limped away, its hull scarred and its system strained. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with the weight of loss. The fleet had suffered catastrophic damage, especially for such a brief encounter. Entire crews lost, ships reduced to debris. The remnants of humanity's presence in high Earth orbit were now little more than scattered wreckage. In the quiet of the debriefing room, Hale sat alone, replaying the footage from her fighter. The glowing sphere on the alien dock continued to pulse, its light spreading across the asteroid field like a dark omen. More Whistler ships poured out of the structure, their numbers swelling as they prepared to expand beyond the asteroid cluster. Reyes placed a hand on Hale's shoulder. "You did your job, Lieutenant. You gave us a chance to fight another day." Hale shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't fight this. Not like this. They're endless." The commander sighed, his gaze fixed on the holographic projection of the alien dock. "Then we'll find another way. We always do." Hale didn't reply. Her eyes lingered on the projection. The glowing sphere now burned into her mind. As the Eclipse Dawn drifted away from the battlefield, the final image from the external cameras showed the alien dock flickering. In the void, barely visible at this distance, its pulsing sphere cast an otherworldly glow, and the Whistler swarm spread outward like a plague, inching closer to humanity's fragile, shrinking frontier. In her quarters, Hale stared out of the viewport at the distant stars. Earth was a faint blue dot against the black of space. They had their own Whistler problems down there. Humanity couldn't take a war on two fronts like this. The bugs weren't just a threat, they were a reckoning, and humanity was running out of time.